afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. Today is Friday, September 16th, and I welcome you all to the state's premier civic affairs event. I'm Melody Rose, the president of City Club, and I would like to welcome members and guests alike. Those of you who are able to join us today in the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio, or watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Today we welcome David Certner of AARP, who will attempt to answer the question, how secure is Social Security? But before our program begins, we have just a few announcements. First, out of respect to our speaker and all of our guests, I hope you will silence your cell phones and other things that make noise. Next, I'd like to give a warm City Club welcome to any new members or guests who are here for the first time today. Any guests or new members, would you rise so that we can recognize you? City Club's corporate and media partners are essential to both the vitality and the sustainability of our club's activities. I'd like to thank our generous media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine, and to extend our deep appreciation to the Friday Forum corporate sponsors. Please join me in offering our sincerest thanks to this fall quarter sponsorship list. AARP Oregon, and in particular their representatives Jerry Cohen, State Director, and Joyce DeMonin, Outreach Director at AARP Oregon. Thank you all. The law firm of Barron Liebman, and utility provider PGE. We're very grateful for your support and your ongoing commitment of the City Club mission. And of course, if any of the rest of you are interested in corporate sponsorship and supporting our mission in this important way, please contact our friendly City Club staff at the back of the room or the City Club offices. Next week, we will invite you to join City Club's Agora Committee at their monthly Citizens Read event. On Monday at the Mission Theater, former Portland Mayor Bud Clark and author Tracy Prince will lead a lively discussion about their book, Portland's Goose Hollow. Agora is also looking for a new member to chair their Citizen Salon group. City Club Citizen Salons bring together a love of good food and sometimes good wine and great conversation in an intimate setting, while at the same time supporting our vital mission of civic engagement. I've been involved in several of these, and I can say personally they are very meaningful events. So I hope you will all consider talking to a City Club staffer about how you can help organize these great salons. Following today's speech, we'll be welcoming City Club members to the microphone as usual for a question and answer session with our speaker. In addition, we invite all members of the audience today to write questions for our speaker on the index cards that are provided to you on your tables. During the board host question, City Club staff will collect your index cards and bring them to the microphone for me to read. We're sure you'll come up with great questions, and we want to hear from you. And now to our program. With the first of nearly 80 million baby boomers now reaching retirement age, many Americans are concerned about our nation's ability to afford and maintain Social Security and Medicare benefits, the traditional pillars of retirement security, not just for baby boomers, but for future generations as well. Today, David Certner, Chief Legislative Counsel for AARP, will outline the steps he considers essential for ensuring the long-term sustainability of both Social Security and Medicare. David Certner has been with AARP since 1982. He currently serves as counsel for the association's legislative, regulatory, and policy efforts, as well as for litigation before the courts. Prior to assuming this role in 2007, he served as director of AARP's 25-person federal affairs shop, where he headed up all federal legislative and regulatory activity, no small undertaking. In both roles, he has testified, of course, numerous times before Congress. Today's speaker previously served as chairman of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act Advisory Council at the Department of Labor and was appointed as a delegate at 3 national summits on retirement savings. An attorney, he received his law degree from the National Law Center at George Washington University. So now, please help me in welcoming our speaker, David Certner.
Thank you, Melody, and thanks to the City Club for inviting me here today. It's always good to get out of Washington. Also, thanks for my colleagues here at the Oregon State Office of AARP, who really, we have, as you may know, over 50 state offices, and I don't say this to all the state offices, so please don't tell them, but you're one of the better ones in the country, so it's good to have them here too. And I was talking to them this morning about the fact that I get to do a long speech today, which I normally don't get to do. As you know, I'm from Washington and generally work in Washington, so that means half people don't really care what you have to say, and the other half really want to hear what you have to say in about 5 minutes or less, sometimes 30 seconds. So to be able to have a long time to talk about some of these important issues is a luxury, so I hope I am able to do them some justice today. I do want to talk about these major pillars of retirement security, and there are big debates going on today, and unfortunately there's often very much misinformation around these debates than information, and I think it's important that people have the right information because we do need to have debates about these issues from time to time as a country and to make some decisions that are based on our values and where we want to go and what's important for the country. These are big programs that are Social Security and Medicare that are critical to this nation, and we need to make smart decisions about them. Let me first start talking about Social Security. Social Security is probably the most important, most successful program in our nation's history. It's been around for almost a third of the entire lifespan of this country now, and it's really a program that's very much woven into the nation's fabric. What's interesting about Social Security is it has broad and consistent support, not just across the population, but over time. We've been doing polling on Social Security for literally decades now. And one of the interesting things to me as I look at that is how consistent and similar the polling is over time and even across generations. Whether you're young or old, whether it was a quarter century ago or today, support for Social Security is about the same. It's very high. That support crosses not just age group, but party lines too. This is a program that has deep support among Democrats, Republicans, and independents. So it is really a program that most people consider, if not the most, at least one of the most important programs in the nation's country. You can see how important it is, I think, to everyday people, and I think that's why Social Security really is seen by the broad part of the population as a critical program, because it's not, even for a young person, it's not, while it's something that's far off, they do see the impact, in their, not just in their communities, but in their families. They see the impact on their parents or their grandparents. There are about 700,000 people in Oregon today who get a Social Security check. It keeps roughly 1/3 of seniors in Oregon out of poverty. This is a substantial program, not just for low-income people, but also for the middle class. Both Social Security and Medicare are pillars of really keeping people in the middle class, allowing people to age with dignity and purpose, and to not be a burden on society or quite frankly, a burden on their children. Social Security today provides an average Social Security benefit is around $14,000. The average income for a senior is a little bit under $20,000. So you can see that Social Security makes up the bulk of income for most seniors today. It is their largest source of income. And again, this is not just for low-income people, but middle-class people well up into the middle class, quite frankly. You don't see a more even distribution of income sources until you actually get up to the very highest end of the income scale, where people do have multiple sources of income. And Social Security obviously pays a modest benefit, and we've again done polling on Social Security and asked, well, do you think Social Security pays too much, too little, or about right? And as you can well imagine, hardly anybody says Social Security pays too much. It's fairly evenly split for those who say it pays either too little or about right. But Social Security is intended to be a base of income upon which you want to build other sources of savings. Unfortunately, we don't always see that happen in this country. Social Security does provide that solid base, but not too many people have other sources of income to go along with it. Obviously, we wish we could do more in that regard, but we haven't done a good job, I think, of that in trying to broaden the tax base and allow people the opportunity to do more beyond Social Security. It's something that we've tried, I think, very hard to do with our policies over the years, but it's difficult. So we end up relying on Social Security probably more than we want to today. The question is, what about tomorrow? What about in the future? Is Social Security still going to be as important as it is today if we have the bulk of the senior population still relying on Social Security? Will that be true in the future? And as we look forward in the future, we actually see a population, an older population, that will be more reliant on Social Security, not less so. And I think when you think about this, I think you understand why that is the case. Pension system in this country, at best we can say it's maintaining, at worst it's gradually shrinking and shriveling. We've moved to different kinds of plans. We used to have more traditional pensions that guaranteed a pension benefit to somebody, a lifetime pension benefit. Now we've moved to individual account type of plans where people have to take much more responsibility in terms of making contributions, making good investment choices, not taking that money out before retirement, and then hoping or doing a good job of managing that money so it doesn't run out. So the pension system has been shrinking, and this past decade, of course, has been a difficult one for anyone trying to save or invest on their own. I think one of my favorite comments that we've seen in this decade with the turbulent market is the notion that my 401k is now a 201k. And I think that really just tells you in one sentence how difficult it is for people to be able to manage to accumulate something to go along with Social Security. Well, what's the biggest asset that most people have as a savings vehicle today? And actually, that's their home and the value of their home. And I don't think I need to tell people what's happened to home values in this country over this past decade. We obviously have a difficult economic climate. People are having enough trouble just finding and keeping a job, more or less having enough money left over to try to save for retirement. Saving is obviously not one of those things that's a top priority for people today. I have other priorities, whether they be paying my school loans or trying to meet my mortgage payment. Retirement is something maybe I can take care of tomorrow. So that's difficult for people, particularly in this economy, to try to save money. We have soaring healthcare costs in this country. That's true for seniors who are trying to make their Social Security last and have enough left over for other necessities. And the average senior, typical seniors, probably spends about 20% of their income on healthcare costs. But healthcare costs are also difficult for workers too, because the cost of healthcare has been growing for employers as well, and it's squeezing out, quite frankly, increases in wages and taking more out of the paycheck and making it even more difficult for people to have enough money left over to save. And needless to say, we've had a very low savings rate in part as a result. We've seen it creep up a little bit in the last year or two, but that's because everybody's afraid to spend money in this economy. But the savings rate for quite some time had really been hovering around zero. So we have this interesting scenario here where we have, pensions are shrinking, people are saving less, home values are dropping, healthcare costs are increasing, and of course, by the way, people are living longer. What are people going to have in retirement? A huge problem going forward, we think, and that's why we think Social Security is even going to be more important in the future than it is today. And obviously, we have tremendous reliance upon Social Security today. We don't see that lessening. So Social Security is going to continue to play a critical role. And I guess sort of one of the big questions is, okay, is Social Security the right way to do this? I mean, what kind of retirement program do we need in this country? And I've done a lot of pension work over my lifetime and a lot of work on retirement security plans. And we have events and conferences from time to time where people who work on pensions get together and talk about what can we do to improve our pension systems. And the conversation, the debate, usually goes along these lines about, what are some of the shortcomings in our pension system and what are ways to improve them. And it usually starts with, well, it'd be great if we had a pension plan that covered everybody, because right now, today, private pension plans only cover about half of the workforce. Well, of course, Social Security covers everyone. Secondly, people say, well, it'd be great if we had a pension plan that was portable, one that you could take with you from job to job. It would automatically follow you. Well, of course, Social Security does that. It would also be great if we had a pension system, which today is really done through mostly tax incentives, that didn't just kind of give greater incentives to people who had higher incomes, which is the way the tax code normally works, but actually had more of a progressive tilt to it and actually could help people who are on the lower end as much, if not more so, than people on the higher end. And again, that's what Social Security does. It would also be great if we had a pension plan that wasn't subject to all these market risks, and we didn't have to worry about whether or not I was going to lose everything in my plan. And even if I did all the right things, as many people tried to do this past decade, find that forces beyond their control, their plans dropped. Wouldn't it be great if we didn't have a plan that was subject to market risk? And of course, Social Security does that. Then the question is, well, wouldn't it be great if we had a pension plan that, once you accumulated all that money, we knew that the money in there would last a lifetime, that we would never run out of that money, because it's very difficult for people to plan how to manage their money in retirement. And of course, the easiest way to plan, if you go to a financial planner and try to figure out how to make my money last, the first question really is, well, how long are you going to live? Okay. Social Security, again, takes care of that problem because it promises and guarantees benefits over your lifetime. It would also be great if the money that we accumulated was able to withstand the fact that we have inflation and your money loses value over time. And pension plans in this country generally don't have inflation and protection. They don't have cost of living adjustments built in. Wouldn't it be great if we had a cost of living adjustment? Well, of course, again, Social Security has a cost of living adjustment. Wouldn't it be great if we had a pension plan where people sort of couldn't get access to it or take it and make sure they had it actually when they got to retirement? I mean, it's one thing to have a 401k plan and be building up money or other source of savings that you have, but it would be great if we could make sure that people didn't take that money out before retirement and make sure that it was there for them in retirement. Because particularly what we've seen this past decade is how many people have had to tap their savings, had to tap their 401k plans because they lost their jobs, or they needed it to buy a house, or they needed it to pay for their college education. And so a lot of people end up using these monies prematurely, and they may be using them for a very good cause and a very important need, but of course then they don't have the money in retirement. So wouldn't it be great if we could be ensured that that money would be there for retirement? And again, Social Security takes care of that for us. Wouldn't it be great if we had a pension plan that also protected the spouse? With the traditional pension plans, you used to have built into them the fact that you had to get an automatic joint and survivor annuity unless the spouse signed off on it. So wouldn't it be great if the pension plan also protected a spouse? And we've been trying to do that in the pension system, but not to great success. But again, Social Security takes care of that and provides spousal protections. So Social Security does even more things, because Social Security also takes care of a worker if they become disabled and provides disability benefits. And Social Security, of course, also will provide survivor protections should a worker pass away and make sure that the children have something from the worker's contributions. So you look at all these things, and we have these pension conferences and talk about what we could use in a pension system, and you walk away knowing, well, we have a system that does that in this country, and it's called Social Security, and it does it better than any other retirement system we have in this country by far. It's by far the best, most progressive, most advanced system that we have, which, by the way, extremely low administrative costs for Social Security as well. It's a large system. Only about 1% goes to administrative costs. So by and large, very efficient. And it's got great support among the public as well. And everyone knows it. You go to work, you have payroll contributions taken out of your paycheck. People may wonder who that FICA guy is, but it's generally something that people do and accept and understand. It's part of the Social Security system. So Social Security is a pretty good program. I assume you would think that I would think that, but I think it's important to sometimes think back and why is Social Security a good program? What does Social Security do so well? Why does it achieve the success that it's had? Why is it so important to people? Why does it work so well? And these are some of the reasons I think that Social Security works so well. It's a very good plan. It was a very well-designed plan, very well administered over the year. It makes a lot of sense as a plan for this country. Okay, so great. It's a good plan. It's got a lot of public support. People like it. People contribute to it. People like the fact that it's a program that I contribute to. I work for it. I've earned it. I get the money back. It's not a welfare program. I'm not getting a handout. I feel like this is a program that I've earned, and I'm proud to get my Social Security benefit. It's not having to take a handout or a welfare, for example, payment that a lot of people don't like. So this is great, but there's one big problem here, which is that will Social Security be there for me? Is it really going to be there? Isn't it going broke? I've been hearing it's going broke. And we've been hearing Social Security's been going broke for, what, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? It's interesting, somebody had shown me a cartoon from back in the 30s when Social Security was being debated, and it was in one of the financial magazines at the time. That was basically two young people talking to Uncle Sam saying, so let me get this straight, I'm going to contribute to this program for 30 years and then it's going to be there for me? Yeah, right. So you've had this skepticism about Social Security from, quite frankly, the beginning. And a lot of people, and we ask sometimes people, well, why are you so skeptical about this program that's now been around for 75 years and paying benefits? I mean, part of it has to do with skepticism with government in general, and we see that when skepticism in government rises, so does skepticism in Social Security. But a lot of people just say, well, that's what we hear all the time. We just hear all the time that Social Security is going broke. We hear it won't be there for us. So, that compounds the fact that we don't think Social Security is going to be there for me. And we see that in our polling. And we now have polling going back, many decades. So, of course, people 25 years ago who are maybe 35 years old were very skeptical that Social Security will be there for them. Of course, in our last round of polling, they're now 60. They're not so skeptical anymore. We've gone through another generation where, one, people didn't think it was going to be there, and two, not only is it there and they're getting it, but it's a lot more important than they ever thought. You ask a 30-year-old whether or not they'll be relying on Social Security, and they'll really say that's not really part of my plans. I'll have a pension, I'll have some savings. Social Security, I don't really see that being part of my future. Of course, you ask a 60-year-old the same question, and it's a very different story. They've tried to save, maybe they had a pension, maybe they didn't, and they just don't accumulate the kinds of savings or pensions that anyone thinks are possible when they're younger. The average 401k balance today is maybe roughly $80,000, depending on how the market's been doing the last couple of months, probably a little less. If you sort of thought about an equivalent of Social Security is roughly the equivalent of about $250,000 if you were converting it into a lump sum. So you could see the value of Social Security is far more than the value of what people are getting out of what they're accumulating in savings right now. So a pretty significant difference. We have a lot of people who complain when they get older about how difficult things are and how hard it's been and trying to make ends meet and so forth. And one of the things in all my years at AARP, I don't think I've ever had somebody come and complain to me that they save too much for retirement, right? I mean, you just don't hear that. Nobody says, gee, I saved too much. And part of the problem in this country is we don't save very much, and very few people really do have enough. So is Social Security going to be there for them? Because, quite frankly, it has to. Well, what is the financial status of Social Security? And really, there aren't a whole lot of debates, really, about what the financial status of Social Security is. The facts are really pretty much there. If you look at the Social Security's actuaries reports and the Congressional Budget Office reports, we'll tell you, because what they do are 75-year projections. Now, this in itself is pretty incredible. We do 75-year projections for this program. I mean, let's see, 75 years ago was 1935. So think of how much the world has changed in those 75 years. Now, it's not to demean these projections, because we really can't project 75 years. We really have enough trouble projecting 5 years. But the point is, we do more scrutiny of these programs than we do anything in this country. We have incredible scrutiny of the program, and we know the program very well. we know how many people there are. It's not really a surprise how many people are retiring and are going to be on Social Security this year. We've pretty much known that for the last 65 years. We knew when they were born how many there were going to be. So the numbers in Social Security, the projections, don't really change that much. And we have a good sense of where Social Security are and what the numbers say. And what the numbers say is that Social Security can pay full benefits for the next 25 years, 100% of promised benefits for the next 25 years. Well, then it's going broke. Well, that's one of the things that I really hate to hear, is that Social Security is going broke. Social Security will never go broke. There are always people paying into the system and contributing. Social Security is always financed. So the question is, well, how much then is coming in? And what's coming in even after that 25-year time is enough money to pay 75% of benefits. And not just 25 years from now, but basically through the rest of the century. So that's the financial status of Social Security right now that there's no dispute over, that Social Security can pay full benefits for the next 25 years, and then for the rest of the century, Social Security can pay about 3/4 of its currently promised benefits. Now that's a shortfall, right? That's the long-term solvency problem. That is a problem. That is a gap that we need to address. We think it's critical that we address that gap. We don't want people to suddenly find that their benefits are cut by 25%. But 25% shortfall 25 years from now is a problem that can be solved with, quite frankly, not much difficulty. The last time we had a big Social Security compromise was back in 1983. In 1983, we had 6 months of solvency left. And we put together a package in 1983 that basically put Social Security on a sound financial footing for at least another 50 years. So we can make changes to the program, and it's valuable and useful that we actually reevaluate these programs. And it's probably been now almost 30 years since we've had a good reevaluation of Social Security and what we need to do and what are some of the choices and how do we make the program solvent for the future and how important is it. And it's good to have, I think, those kinds of debates really about any program, not just Social Security. But the magnitude of the problem in Social Security is really not that significant. Right now, put it in GDP terms, Social Security is roughly taking up about 5% of GDP in this country. In order to make it fully solvent, it would need to take up 6% of GDP in this country. That's not really that significant when you think about the fact that we have budget deficits right now that are multiple times or they're almost 50% of GDP in this country right now. So we have a Social Security system that, relative to a lot of other systems, is really in pretty good shape financially. We know we have a long-term problem, but why do we have this long-term problem? Did Social Security do something wrong? Was there something bad happen? Was there financial fraud? Was there some bad government oversight? No, that's not why we have this long-term problem. The reason we have a long-term problem is we have more people who are living longer. It's a demographic issue. Well, that's a pretty good problem, right? I mean, the choice would be, well, we could, have more people take up smoking, and that would probably help Social Security. That doesn't really help Medicare, quite frankly. But, so this is a good problem, right? People are living longer, and we have, more people. The fastest growing part of the population is the 85-plus population right now. So this is a good thing. So we know that people are living longer, so we're going to need some additional financing if we want to make sure that Social Security can be there in the future. Not a bad problem, but, so let's talk about that. What do we want to do about that? How do we want to finance that? Does it make sense? Are we doing something wrong with Social Security today? Well, no, we're not really doing something wrong with Social Security today. In fact, Social Security today is in the black, and it's taking in a lot more money than it needs to pay benefits. Some of you may have seen recently, there's been a lot of stories about how Social Security is in the red now. That's just not quite true. And here's what's being left out of this discussion today. Since 1983, we've actually been, in that compromise, have been putting more money in the system than we needed to pay benefits. So we've been creating a surplus of money. And go back a little bit further, one of the reasons we started talking about the budget, we have the Social Security budget, and then we have the rest of the federal budget. But back in the 60s, Lyndon Johnson sort of put them together. He was trying to mask some of the costs of the Vietnam War. And so the two budgets got commingled. And once they got commingled, it was a little bit more difficult to pull them apart. But in the '83 compromise, we said, well, we know these baby boomers are coming, right? We've known who was born and when they were going to retire. So we needed to build up a little bit of reserves in advance for this growing population. So people over the last 20 or 30 years have been contributing more money than is needed to pay currently needed benefits. Well, what's been happening with that money? Well, that money goes into the Social Security Trust Fund. This is a legally established trust fund. And by law, the trust fund must invest in U.S. Treasury bonds backed by the full faith and credit of the federal government. Now, of course, we picked Treasury bonds because it is the safest investment in the world. In fact, we just saw that in the last crisis where, ironically, when the Treasury got downgraded and it started to cause a little bit of a worldwide fuss, people all over the world ran into Treasury bonds as the safest investment. So that's where Social Security by law is invested. And Social Security holds about, right now, roughly $2.6 trillion. That's trillion with a T, not an M or a B, but $2.6 trillion of Treasury bonds. That's in the Social Security Trust Fund. They pay interest to Social Security. Roughly right now, I think they're paying about 4.6% of interest. So these are bonds like a lot of other people who hold bonds, whether they be individuals or pension plans or, quite frankly, these days, a lot of foreign countries, including China, who I think is the largest foreign holder of bonds. I think holds roughly about $1 trillion at last count of U.S. Treasury bonds. But all these bondholders, including Social Security, expect to be paid their money back. And indeed, the money is paid back to Social Security every year. They get the interest. So when you hear that Social Security is in the red or going broke, they're not. They've got a reserve of $2.6 trillion, and they continue to take in more money right now than they need to pay benefits. Those trust funds are actually growing. Social Security is in the black. The rest of the federal government is in the red. You push them together, as they like to do, and suddenly the rest of the federal government budget doesn't look as bad because it uses all the Social Security Trust Fund surpluses to offset it. We tried to get away from this debate because Social Security is a separately financed program. You all know that. You pay your contributions out of your paychecks every 2 weeks, 6.2%. Goes into the Social Security Trust Funds. That money can't be used for anything else. And it's not used for anything else. It goes in the trust fund. It's only used for Social Security. We wanted to try to show the distinction here between Social Security and the rest of the federal budget. It doesn't use any general revenues as a separate program. And in 1990, we actually passed a law that said very clearly that Social Security would be pulled out off budget and move away from the LBJ framework, and it would have to be shown separately. Well, we passed that law, but we still show the two together. We still show a unified budget rather than talking about them separately. And of course, it's a lot easier for people in Washington to do that because it makes the budget deficits look smaller. But we had, again, another debate about this in 2000. You probably all remember a very famous word that came out of that debate. It was called the lockbox. It was trying to get at the same idea. Social Security is a separately funded program. It's separately paid for. It's got a separate treasury stream. It's got a separate income stream. It's got a separate benefit stream. Don't commingle it with the federal deficit. Social Security didn't cause the federal budget deficit. Social Security is not contributing to the federal budget deficit. In fact, Social Security is actually masking the federal budget deficit. The $2.6 trillion of reserves in Social Security masks the deficit in the rest of the budget. The government is obligated to pay those monies back, just as it is any other bondholder. It's obligated to pay those interest amounts, which they do, that help contribute to being able to pay Social Security benefits. I think this is a very important component and seems to be missing somewhat from the debate we have today. And it's very troubling to some of us who care a lot about Social Security that there seems to be a confusion between the state of Social Security, a program that's in the black and will be in the black for at least another 25 years, and the state of the rest of the federal budget. The rest of the federal budget, as we all know, is in the red and has seen a dramatic increase in both annual deficits and accumulated debt, particularly over this past decade. It's almost hard to believe that 10 years ago, the problem we had was that we had surpluses as far as the eye could see, and people were wondering, well, this is a terrible problem. We have too much in surpluses. And we've now had a decade worth of, in part, policies that were put in place, in part, recessions, wars that were not paid for, that have basically wiped out all those surpluses and put us in a deficit position. And now that the government is in a very bad deficit position, they seem to be turning around and looking at Social Security and saying, well, we're in a pretty tough shape, and it's going to be a little bit harder for us to pay back that interest and those bonds that we owe you, so maybe it would be better if we cut benefits. And we think this is just morally and politically wrong. People have been paying in those dedicated funds for Social Security to make sure that Social Security would be there. We know we have problems in the rest of the federal budget. We know we need to deal with those problems in the rest of the federal budget. But using, quite frankly, what was the well-managed Social Security fund as some kind of a piggy bank to deal with the problems in the rest of the federal budget while harming the retirement security of either people today or in the future is wrong and is short-sighted. We need a strong Social Security program. We need a strong economy, but don't pick on Social Security in order to deal with the problems in the rest of the federal budget. We think there's really a fundamentally important issue and a fundamentally important debate going on now in Washington. And I think this debate was recognized, and I will just read one thing because it was one of my favorite quotes from FDR about the Social Security program, and so I'll read this to you. But he said, we put those payroll contributions there so as to give the contributors a legal, moral, and political right to collect their pensions. With those taxes in there, no damn politician can ever scrap my Social Security program. Pretty smart guy, FDR, and I think part of the thinking behind that is what's made Social Security such a strong success over the years. And certainly part of AARP's fight and battle right now is to make sure that we do keep these programs separate, that we don't commingle the discussion over the federal budget deficit with Social Security. We need a Social Security debate, but it needs to be separate from the federal budget debate. It needs to be focused on retirement security, not on filling up the federal budget debate. And I think that's the debate that we have going on in part in Washington right now, and one obviously that we are going to be watching very, very closely. We want to make sure that we have a separate debate on Social Security with the right goal. The goal right now in Washington is just about cutting things. The goal in a Social Security debate really needs to be about financial security and retirement. And we need to have that debate with the American public. Quite frankly, we haven't had that debate yet. And we need to have that in AARP. We hope we'll certainly take a leadership role in trying to bring out to the public the issues that are on the table about what do we do in terms of fixing Social Security. I mean, Social Security really is, when it comes down to it, basic math, as it is with any pension plan. If you want to have more in retirement, then you need to contribute a little bit more. And that's the kind of debate we basically need to have at a most fundamental level about Social Security. Most of the polling that we do right now basically says that people are willing to contribute more in order to maintain their Social Security benefits. That's a fundamental question. We need to have that discussion and that debate in this country. When we have that debate and we're talking and thinking about retirement security and what we need and what role Social Security will play, I think we'll end up with far better choices. Today, unfortunately, the debate is a lot more about how do we cut things. We're looking at a budget frame. We're not thinking about retirement security. We're not necessarily thinking about health security. We're thinking about, oh my God, we've really done some bad things and had some bad things happen to us the last 10 years. How do we get that ledger back in shape? How do we make those numbers add up? But they're not thinking too much about the policies. And we see that happening not just with Social Security, quite frankly, but with Medicare as well. Unlike Social Security, which is really a separate program, separate from the federal budget, Medicare is a part of the federal budget. People do contribute into the Social Security, into the Medicare system, similar to Social Security over their lifetimes. People do pay premiums into the program, but there are also general revenues that come into the Medicare program as well. And unlike Social Security, which is a separate program that can be addressed and fixed on its own, Medicare is really not a separate program from the rest of the healthcare system. Medicare is a part of the healthcare system. It's a significant part of the healthcare system, but you can fix Social Security on its own. You can't really fix Medicare on its own. Medicare is part of a healthcare system that doesn't work very well, and you need to fix the whole healthcare system in order to help fix Medicare. Medicare is actually in a little bit more difficult financial shape than Social Security. It's got a similar population, in terms of problems of demographics, but Medicare has actually much bigger problems. And why is that? Because demographics really aren't the driving problem in Medicare. The bigger part of the problem in Medicare really comes from the fact that we have high healthcare costs in a healthcare system that all of you know is let's just say at best is inefficient in terms of spending money. And so we need to deal with Medicare in the context of improving the entire healthcare system. We need to do a much better job of reining down high healthcare costs. We need to do a better job of improving incentives in the healthcare system. We need to do a better job of pulling back administrative costs. Again, Medicare reasonably good administratively, but we can do more to weed out the fraud and the waste, not just in the Medicare system, but the entire healthcare system. There's too much wasted money in our healthcare system. Unlike in Social Security, most of the dollars coming in are being paid out in benefits. You don't have a lot of waste in money. And of course, in the healthcare system, we have a lot of expensive technology that also really does drive up healthcare prices. So we've got to do more to help fix the entire healthcare system in order to get at the issues of Medicare. Medicare can help. Medicare can be a driver because it is a big purchaser in improving the healthcare system in this country. And I think we've done some things in the last healthcare debate to actually move that ball forward. And it's a lot of the things you don't hear about as much in terms of things we did in the healthcare law. But we really are trying to do a better job of putting the right incentives in the healthcare system. Right now in Medicare, you get paid based on the volume of the services you provide. So the more services you provide, the more people get paid. It would be much better if we had a system where the incentives were really not necessarily to provide volume, more services, but to provide value. What are the services that are needed? It would also be better if we could coordinate care better. Medicare doesn't do the greatest job of coordinating health care for people in Medicare. And quite frankly, we know that as with Medicare, as with the entire healthcare system, it's really the smaller percentage of people who have multiple conditions who really use up a significant amount of the healthcare dollars and the healthcare services. So if we can do a better job of coordinating the care for people who have multiple illnesses and multiple chronic conditions, and obviously for an older population, you see that quite frequently, we can do a much better job of holding down healthcare costs and improving the quality of care we deliver. This is not about just saving money. It's about trying to actually improve the way we deliver healthcare that could actually boost both the quality of care and the amount of money that we're saving in the system. We can also do more to use health information technology. I think the medical field has great technology in terms of things like MRIs, but doesn't really do a good job of using technology to improve the way the efficiency of the health system runs. I mean, anybody who walks into a doctor's office and they're slowly changing, but what business do you walk into right now that has thousands of manila envelopes stacked up behind the desk? I mean, no other business in the country runs that way and runs that inefficiently. And health information technology, I think, can really help boost the efficiency of our healthcare system. And we need to do more about evidence-based medicine. Why aren't we using, quite frankly, the things we learn about what practices work best so we know we're giving the right people the right health care at the right time, instead of having what we have today, which is we practice different kinds of health care in different parts of the country really based on what were the practice standards in that part of the country, not necessarily on what health care actually works and works better. If you go in and somebody says to you, well, you have two choices here, we can do an angioplasty or a stent, your first question is, well, which one is going to work? Not which one do I want? And doctors and patients need to know those answers. We also can do a lot more to tackle high drug costs in this country. We've done a lot, I think, over the years to improve drug coverage, but we really haven't done much to tackle high drug costs. Anybody who looks at drug prices throughout the rest of the world knows that this country is paying much higher prices than any other country in the world for their drugs. The drug industry has been very good about keeping down competition in terms of keeping lower priced drugs from abroad from being able to compete with drugs in this country. We need to do a lot more basically to, I think, control drug costs. If you look at the cost of generic drugs, it's basically been relatively flat over the last decade where there's competition, but when you come to brand name drugs, drug costs have been increasing at 2 or 3 times inflation for the last 10 years. Again, that's another big cost driver for the healthcare system, but particularly for the Medicare population, which tends to use multiple numbers of drugs. But again, we're having the same debate in Washington now about the budget, which is, are we going to be trying to improve health care? Are we trying to improve health security? Or are we just trying to save the federal government some money? And I think the whole debate in Washington right now is really about how do we save the federal government money. They're not really looking at how do we improve the healthcare system. They're really looking at how do we shift costs to somebody else. Most of the big proposals on the table today in Washington in the budget deficit debate are about how can the federal government make somebody else pay more? How do we make employers pay more? How do we make the states pay more? And most concerning for us is how do we make senior citizens pay more for their health care? We don't find seniors in this country telling us that they don't pay enough for health care. Quite the opposite. Medicare is a good program, but Medicare, I think, only covers roughly about half of the costs for most seniors today and doesn't cover some areas in general like long-term care at all. So we need to do a better job of focusing the debate in Washington about how do we improve health care, not how do we just shift health costs to more players in the system, particularly seniors who really can't bear that. And let me mention one example that we may hear prominently, which is some now in Washington are talking about, let's raise the eligibility for Medicare from 65 to 67. Now what does that accomplish? Well, let's see, it means that a 65 or 66-year-old, many people who've been just sort of, and we hear this all the time from people who are 62 and 63 saying, I'm just holding on till I get to Medicare because I can't afford or I can't get health insurance. Now we'll raise that age. That means for that group of people who are 65, 66, they won't have, may not even be able to get health insurance because 1 out of 4 people can't even get health insurance. They may not even be able to afford it because the cost for somebody at that age is very high. And so they're going to either have to pay a lot out of their own pockets for health care. Employers are going to have to pick up a lot more of those costs. State Medicaid programs are going to have to pick up more of those costs. And in essence, what will happen is health care costs will actually go up. The federal government will be paying less, but everybody else in total will be paying more. So this is a policy that means we're going to have more uninsured, and it's going to cost the healthcare system even more money. But the federal government will be able to say, well, this was great. We reduced healthcare costs and we helped our budget deficit problem. We don't think that's the right way to go about dealing with our healthcare system. We need to really lower costs across the board. And so for both Social Security and Medicare, what we need to do is focus on health security, retirement security, not just on shifting costs and cutting benefits. Thank you.
Before I introduce our Friday Forum host, if you have written a question on an index card, now's the time to raise it so that the staff can collect it from you and bring it up to me. The first question for our speaker, as always, will be from our Friday Forum host, who today is Marge Kafuri. In addition to serving twice on the club's Board of Governors, Marge has been hugely instrumental in the quality of the Friday Forum program planning that we all appreciate. As a long-term Friday Forum committee member and the current chair, Marge has personally curated over a year's worth of Friday Forum programs. So thank you to Marge.
And thank you, David, for your remarks. They're going to, obviously, these issues are going to affect everybody in this room and everybody that's listening one time or another in your lives. So thank you for your comments. My question is this. The AARP is obviously a very powerful lobbying force in Congress. You represent, I think, more than 35 million people. And as you've said, the majority of your members, at least, support paying increased taxes rather than cutting Social Security or Medicare benefits. So my question has to do with the wage cap, which is something that I've never really fully understood. Currently, wages above about $106,000 a year are completely exempt from Social Security taxation at all. Some people want to increase that cap. My question is, why is there a cap at all? Since anybody who has earned a wage is eligible to receive Social Security, why are we capping it at any level at all?
Thank you, and that's a good question. And so for those who don't know, Social Security payroll taxes of 6.2% are levied on both the employer and employee on all wages up to $106,800. Amounts above that are not taxed. The reason we have a cap at all is because Social Security is a contributory program, right? Everybody pays into the program, and everybody gets a benefit back from the program. And Social Security is designed to provide a base of income. So obviously everybody is contributing to the program up to that income level. The reason that there's no cap on Social Security is because if you were making, let's just say, $10 million, you would be contributing an enormous amount of money into the system. And that would also mean that at the end of the day, you would be getting back an enormous Social Security benefit. So having a cap that's lifted altogether really doesn't make sense, I think, or is consistent with the Social Security system. However, there is a debate about what the level of the cap should be. And back in 1983, essentially when we had the last compromise, we were basically taxing roughly 90% of wages in the entire economy. And what's basically happened since 1983 is that we've seen more wage stagnation below that amount and much greater wage growth on amounts above that level. So in other words, people at the very high end have seen their salaries go up dramatically more. And the end result of that is that many more percent of the wages in this country are now not being taxed. So before, where we were taxing 90% of all the wages in the economy, we're only taxing now, I think, a little less than 85% of the wages in the economy. We think we ought to go back to that 90% level, that we ought to raise the cap back up to get to that 90% level. That's one way of bringing additional funding into the Social Security program that's basically consistent with where the program has been historically in taxing 90% of the wages in the economy. It would ask for a contribution from people who I think are better able to afford to pay that. They would also be getting a return back on some of those contributions as well, because you do get returns based on all your contributions. But we think that's one way to help solve the shortfall. And of course, it depends on how you do it and how quickly you do it. But that one change alone, just raising the cap, would deal with probably over a third of the Social Security shortfall.
We'll now take questions from the floor. As always, members are invited to the microphone to ask their questions. Asking a question at a Friday forum is a privilege of City Club membership. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in 30 seconds or less, or you will see the famous City Club question mark, which will remind you to wrap up. Thank you, and I will also read at least one audience member question from the podium.
My question has to do with the Medicare drug benefit. We all know that our government does not bargain with the drug manufacturers for a price. The VA does, the Canadians do. Would AARP support a change in that law so that we could bargain with the large pharmaceutical companies?
It's a good question. Not only would AARP, but AARP has. And we have already endorsed bills in the past to restore the ability of the federal government, and Medicare in particular, to negotiate for lower drug prices. I will say in the Part D program, what we did was more set up a competition among different plans. And actually, if you look at what's happened in the Part D program for Medicare, there's actually been some pretty good competition in terms of keeping drug prices down. Premiums in the Part D program have not risen very dramatically. I think in this year they're not rising much at all. The problem is not every drug does have competition. There are many drugs that are brand name drugs or sole source drugs that don't have competition. And particularly for those kinds of drugs where there's no competition, there's really no pricing control. And you have extremely high prices, for example, as I mentioned earlier, for brand name drugs, and particularly for some of the new drugs that are coming on the market, so-called biological drugs that are used for cancer and other diseases that are extremely expensive, could be as much as $10,000 a month. And I think particularly for those kinds of drugs, it's really critical that Medicare have some ability to negotiate. But as I mentioned, I think the drug industry has done a good job of trying to keep their prices higher by not allowing for things like negotiation, for importation of lower priced drugs from abroad. So I thank you for your question.
Lee Stevenson Kuhn, City Club member. Thank you for your illuminating remarks. I am on both Social Security and Medicare, and they both work very well. My question, will a holiday on FICA taxes help or hurt Social Security?
The question is on a payroll tax holiday, and so for those who are not familiar with it, we have a temporary 1 year in effect this year, and there's proposals to extend that, of essentially reducing the payroll tax that people are paying into Social Security. Essentially this year it was reduced by 2 percentage points, so instead of that 6.2, you're paying 4.2. And the idea of that was to put money back in people's pockets to help stimulate the economy. Now, I think we need to be clear about one thing. Money still goes into Social Security. In essence, what's happening here is that these are all general revenues that are being kind of funneled back into people's pockets through use of the Social Security system. So all those monies that are not going into Social Security for the payroll tax holiday, the federal government is repaying the trust funds. So the trust funds are not being harmed. The trust funds are being kept whole. People's earnings on Social Security are being kept whole. Now, there is a bigger debate about whether doing this at all is a good idea, because a payroll tax holiday is intended to put money back in people's pockets to help stimulate the economy. Many think that's a good thing because obviously the economy needs a boost. Of course, the problem is you contribute even further to the federal budget deficit, because this is money coming from the federal government is reimbursing the Social Security Trust Fund. So Social Security is kept whole, but the federal government is seeing 100, 200, 300 billion, depending on how much is done, of more deficit.
One from the floor. When Social Security was originally enacted, the expectation was that retirees would only live a few years beyond when benefits kick in, not decades beyond when benefits kick in. To make the systems more sustainable, don't we need to increase significantly the age at which benefits are made available?
Well, raising the retirement age is obviously one issue and one idea that's been put on the table. In fact, many of you probably know that as part of the compromise Social Security package in 1983, Social Security eligibility age was raised. Now, to show you what kind of lead-in times we do in Social Security, that age is still going up, and we put that in place now, 27 years ago, and the age is still going up to age 67. So that's certainly an issue that's on the table, and I think is going to be part of the debate. I think what we need to look at, though, is what is the impact of that kind of a change. And this is an option among many others that I think will be on the table. So I won't give you a yes or no, but I'll just tell you some of the factors that we look at. One is the fact that most people today are not working to 67. In fact, most people don't even work to 65. And the fact that life expectancy has gone up, and it actually has not gone up decades, the reason it seems longer than it is because actually we've done a lot more to reduce the amount of people who die early in this country than people living decades longer. But when you retire early, and most people today still take Social Security at age 62. So when you take your benefit at age 62, you have an actuarial reduction from 67. And so therefore, people essentially get about a 25% reduction. So now they're living on a benefit that's about 25% less throughout their lifetime when they retire early. Now, why do people retire early? Well, some do because they can, but many do because, particularly what we've seen in the last year or two, is they don't have a job, they can't find a job, they've lost a job, or they have health problems, either physical or mental health problems. And I also had one of my favorite remarks from a member of Congress. One said to me, sure, it's easy for us in Washington, sitting in our nice offices, air-conditioned offices, working at our computers to talk about working to age 67, but none of the people who have dirt under their fingernails think this is a great idea. I mean, asking an iron worker or a steel worker to work to their 67 just isn't feasible. So there are a lot of pluses and minuses. Sure, it's a way of saving money, but the question is that really the best way to do it? Is that the most efficient and targeted way to do it?
I'm sorry, but we've run out of time for further questions, and we will have to stop for today. Apologies to those in line. Please join us next week when Mark Langseth of the I Have a Dream Foundation will discuss how to help low-income children achieve academic success. As we close, please join me in expressing our deep appreciation to today's guest, David Certner. We are adjourned.